The recipe for seduction. Julian believed that love, like a perfectly balanced sauce, required just the right ingredients: charm, beauty, and a bank account that could fund a small country. Living in Banana Island with her wealthy aunt had spoiled her beyond repair. She had never worked a day in her life, and she had no plans to start now. Why bother when the right man would provide everything she needed? But unlike other desperate socialites, Julian had a secret weapon. She could cook. Not just any cooking. Food was so divine it could make a billionaire rethink his prenup. Determined to secure her future, she made a list of Banana Island's most eligible bachelors, from oil tycoons to tech moguls. She had her eyes on men whose bank accounts were as deep as their egos. And so, she began her quest. One lavish dinner party at a time. But Julian's methods weren't always conventional. Some women used subtlety. She used trespassing. Others sent polite texts. She hacked into phones. If love was a battlefield, Julian was a one-woman army, armed with whisk and absolutely no shame. Julian's first target was Charles Okafor, a real estate mogul whose mansion had more security cameras than a prison. She invited him to a dinner, ensuring he had no choice but to say yes, mainly by casually mentioning she had prepared a 5-course meal, including his favorite truffle-infused jollof rice. When he arrived, Julian greeted him in a dress so tight it defied physics. She had spent hours perfecting the meal, carefully plating each dish to look effortless. As Charles took his first bite, she watched him closely, waiting for the magic to happen. But the magic never came. Charles enjoyed the meal, complimented her skills, then, to her horror, started talking about his fiancé. Julia nearly choked on her own masterpiece. A fiancé? That wasn't in her research. Furious at her failure, she did what any rational woman would do. She excused herself, sneaked into his coat pocket, and grabbed his phone. If she couldn't have Charles, she could at least confirm whether the so-called fiancé was real or just another obstacle to be removed. Julian perched on her bed, Charles' phone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. She had cracked his passcode in under 3 tries. Men were predictable like that. Scrolling through his messages, he found a fiancé, a model named Amara. Beautifully but tragically boring. Julian scoffed. Charles deserved excitement, and who better than a woman who could make a souffle and break into his house if necessary. She was about to delete Amara's contact when Charles' phone vibrated with an incoming call. Panicked, Julia flung it across the room like a hot potato. Unfortunately, her aim was terrible. The phone hit a vase, sending it crashing on the floor. A moment later, her aunt barged in. "Julian, what is going on?" Julian blinked innocently, quickly stuffing the phone under her pillow. "Nothing, auntie. Just practicing my shelf reflexes." Her aunt eyed her suspiciously before sighing and leaving. Julian exhaled. Tonight was a failure, but she wouldn't give up. Charles might be off limit, but Banana Island was full of men with money, and Julian had plenty of recipes left to try. After the Charles disaster, Julian needed a fresh start. Lucky for her, a new bachelor had moved into Banana Island. David Adeyemi, a tech billionaire with the social skill of a houseplant. He was rich, single, and best of all, completely unaware of her reputation. Julian saw an opportunity. If Charles couldn't appreciate her talent, David certainly would. She devised a flawless plan. She would accidentally bump into him at his favorite cafe, impress him with her wit, and then invite him over for a meal so good he'd forget how to spell prenup. Dressed in an effortlessly elegant sundress, Julian strolled into the cafe, spotted David, and executed her move. She tripped gracefully, of course, spilling coffee onto his lap. "Oh no, I'm so clumsy," she gasped, dabbing at his expensive suit with a napkin. David stared at her, unimpressed. "It's fine," he muttered, clearly eager to escape, but Julian wasn't one to give up. "Let me make it up to you," she cooed. "I'm an amazing cook." At the mention of food, David hesitated. Julian smiled. Hook, line, and sinker. David hesitated, eyeing Julian with a wary skepticism of a man who had seen so many social climbers in Banana Island. But Julian knew the power of food. Just one dinner, she insisted, tilting her head at the perfect angle of innocence. I promise, once you taste my cooking, you will forget all about this coffee stain. He sighed, clearly uninterested in small talk, but intrigued enough by the promise of a home-cooked meal. Fine, one dinner. Julian beamed, step 1 complete. Now, all she had to do was to cook a meal so unforgettable that David would start considering her wife material. The night of the dinner, Julian pulled out all the stops, candles, soft jars, and a menu so luxurious it would have been served at a 5-star restaurant. She had made lobster biscuit, saffron-infused rice, and a chocolate souffle that would made a grown man cry. Everything was perfect until David called. Hey, something came up. Rent check. Julian stared at her phone in disbelief. Rent check? No one cancelled on Julian. She had spent hours cooking, filled with indignation and maybe a bit of insanity. She grabbed the carefully plated dishes matched to his mansion and let herself in because, of course, she had already found out his gate code. Julian stepped into David's mansion, balancing a tray of food in one hand and her dignity in the other. The house was sleek, modern, and tragically sterile. No warmth, no character, just expensive furniture that looks like it had never been touched. This man needs me, she thought, already imagining herself redecorating with tasteful chandeliers and romantic floral arrangements. She set the food on his dining table, ready to surprise him with a home-cooked meal he hadn't asked for. But as she turned towards the living room, she saw something that made her nearly drop the souffle. David wasn't alone. He was lounging on his massive leather couch, deep in conversation with a stunning woman who looked like she had stepped out of a luxury perfume ad. Julian ducked behind the decorative vase, her mind racing. Who was she? A business associate? A cousin? Wishful thinking. The way the woman laughed, tilting her head just so, made it clear she was a competition. Julian clenched her fist. This was supposed to be her night. She hadn't broken into his house just to be upstaged. No, she needed to act fast. If this woman thought she would win David over, she had another thing coming. Julian had 2 choices: slink away in a defeat or take control of the situation. Naturally, she chose chaos. Straightening her dress, she strode out from behind the vase like she absolutely belonged there. David! She exclaimed, flashing her most dazzling smile. I hope you don't mind, but I figured since you cancelled on dinner, I'd bring dinner to you. The woman on the couch blinked in confusion, while David shut up, looking both startled and mildly horrified. Julian, he stammered. How did you get in here? Julian ignored the question, setting the tray down with a flourish. I made a lobster biscuit and souffle. You wouldn't want it to go to waste, would you? David rubbed his temple like a man, realizing he had made a terrible mistake. His companion, clearly amused, leaned back with an arched brow. You must be a friend of David's. Julian beamed. More than that, actually, I'm his personal chef in training. She picked up a spoon and, without waiting for permission, lifted a bite of biscuit to David's lips. He hesitated, then took the bite, either out of shock or sheer survival instinct. Julian smirked, victorious. This woman might be beautiful, but could she make a saffron-infused rice dish that sent men into trance? Unlikely. Now, all she had to do was survive whatever consequences came next. David looked like he wanted to evaporate, but Julian remained unfazed. She had spent hours perfecting this meal, and if she had to spoon-feed him in front of this little friend, then so be it. The woman, clearly entertained, swallowed her wine and smirked. Well, David, she said, amusement dripping from her voice. I had no idea you had such dedicated staff. Julian's smile twitched. Staff? She was wife material and not glorified caterer. Before she could correct the record, David finally found his voice. Julian, I think you should. Before he could finish, a piercing beep 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 echoed through the mansion. Julian froze, Oh no! In her excitement or perhaps mild trespassing, she had forgotten about high-tech security systems. Camera whirled to life, and within seconds, the front gate screen lit up, showing two uniformed security guards approaching. David stared at her, wide-eyed. "Please tell me you didn't set off my alarm system." Julian swallowed. "Would you believe me if I said it was a love alarm?" The guard knocked, and David sighed, rubbing his temples again. Julian straightened her dress. It might be time for a strategic retreat before she ended up banned from another billionaire's home. Julian had no intention of being dragged out by security like some common intruder. She was a woman of grace, poise, and quick reflexes. Thinking fast, she grabbed the tray of souffle and turned to David with a wide, innocent eyes. "You wouldn't let them manhandle a woman carrying delicate French dessert, would you?" David looked utterly exhausted. "Julian, leave!" But Julian had already started moving, gracefully of course, toward the back of the house. The guards knocked louder, panic rising. She scanned the room for an escape route. Then she spotted it, a massive floor-to-ceiling window leading straight to the garden. Without hesitation, she yanked it open and stepped outside, only to realize that she has grossly miscalculated. The moment her heels hit the grass, she slipped, the souffle tray flying into the air in slow-motion horror. She landed flat on her back, the souffle landing tragically on her face. As she lay there covered in her own masterpiece, she heard the woman inside burst into laughter. "Charming," the woman quipped. Julian groaned, wiping chocolate off her cheek. This was not her finest hour. She wasn't giving up. David Adeyemi might have won this round, but Julian was already plotting her next move. Julian had suffered many indignities in life, being ignored at the luxury handbag store, once ordering a latte that arrived lukewarm, and now being laughed at by some mysterious woman while covered in souffle. But a true queen never crumbles. The next morning, after scrubbing every trace of chocolate from her hair, she put on a fresh designer dress and devised a new plan. David clearly needed a little convincing, and Julian knew just the way to do it. With a little social engineering, also known as shameless manipulation, she charmed the security guard at David's office into letting her inside. Striding confidently past confused employees, she reached to his private office and pushed the door open. David looked up from his laptop, utterly baffled. "Julian," he sighed. "How? Why? What?" Julian tossed her hair. "I came to apologize for last night," she said sweetly, before setting a fresh homemade croissant on his desk. "I also took the liberty of reviewing your schedule." David blinked. "You did what?" Julian ignored. "You have too many meetings. Stress is bad for digestion. Luckily, I will be making all your meals from now on." She beamed. "For free, for now." David looked at her like she had lost her mind. Maybe she had, but Julian knew one thing for sure. This was how love stories began.